That the more we talked about the things that changed in team development since lockdown, the more we realized that the pressure on team leaders are almost to become the OD practitioners, and that us as OD practitioners have almost gone from our job was to go in and to, or our job was sometimes to go in and to develop a team, and then you leave again. You spend 2 days with a team, sometimes there's some follow-ups, but to make it a more sustainable solution is to help the team leaders almost become the OD practitioners, so that the team leaders are enabled to lead their teams in a different way, with a broader view of organization development, understanding the bigger picture aspects of the organization, being more aware of what's going on in the organization, understanding the role of each team, the alignment to the strategy, but also being to facilitate team meetings better, to connect more on a human level, for themselves to work on their own personal development, to get to know themselves better, but also for them to understand team development better and everything that goes through with team development, from example forming, storming, norming, and to help the team members understand each other better. So it was more of a connection on a human side, but in what we were talking about, it was more becoming the OD practitioner, and us as OD practitioners having the responsibility to enable those team leaders. So it's a different kind of a relationship, and we thought, let's explore that further today. If that was our conclusion from the last one, then let's dig deeper and see, so how do we do this, and what is it we need to do? And Christo's been thinking about this quite a lot in some of the projects that he's been working. So yesterday morning we had a conversation, and he's done so much thinking that he's agreed to take us through some of that thinking today, to look at, so what is it then that these team leaders need to be able to do, and why, and how do we help them? So Christo, I'm going to hand over to you for now.
Thanks, Liesel. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I've been thinking more about it. And of course, as you think more, you get more confused. That's par for the course. It's an interesting thought, the thought that the team leader becomes more like an early practitioner. And I think for me, that's sort of the first thing that I just want to explore a little bit. Would you make clear? Because I don't think we want to turn the team leaders into early practitioners. For the simple reason that I think the early practitioner stands outside and comes in and leaves. And the team leader is there, is in and out, and has got a specific relationship with the team, etc., etc. So it's a funny thing that we do in OD. One of the things that we always speak about as OD practitioners is that we're trying to work ourselves out of the work. We're trying to get ourselves out of the organization. We don't want to come into the organization and become part of the furniture. That would rob us of a number of things that we should be able to do as organization development practitioners, which is, amongst other things, to bring a different perspective, to challenge the organization, to really ask the difficult questions, and really, in a sense, to be able to ask the obvious questions that nobody is asking. So it's very important for us to come in and then leave more capability in the organization. When we exit, there's a lot of the stuff that we've come in and have been doing that's perhaps almost the technical side of organization development that we want to leave behind. And I think it's in this respect that when we do leadership development, or when we do team development, or when we do the work on the development of an organization culture, whatever that may mean, that we bring specific organization development practices into the organization and hand those practices over to whomever is staying behind in the organization, being in the organization. And I think it's no different from team leaders. I also think from an organization development perspective that just makes it easier for us. Because if there's certain things that we have embedded or helped to develop in an organization, and we need to work in that organization, we start from a different place. And we can move more quickly to the next level of work to develop the organization. So that's the one part. And then the next part is a very Worldsview Academy specific approach that I just want to put out there as a foundation for whatever we talk about. We believe that the work of organization development is about supporting organizations in their endeavors to become more effective in a healthy way. And I mean, one of the competing disciplines in a way is organization effectiveness. And that for us just doesn't cut it, you know. That's just one part of it, is effectiveness. Now, of course, you want high performance teams, you want high performance organizations, which generally means they're more effective. They sell more, they deliver more, they gain bigger market share, etc., etc. So that's one part of the story. And for us as organization development practitioners, that is incredibly important, the effectiveness part. I think sometimes organization development gets a bit of a reputation that it only works on the other side. It only works on the so-called human side. Which I think people translate as in our thing, or effective organization in a healthy way. They look at that as the healthy part. Oh, the healthy part is the human part. But who is it that's effective? It's the humans that are effective. And the humans need to be effective and healthy. And they can't be the one and not the other. That's not going to last. If you're just healthy and you're not effective, you're actually not really healthy, are you? And if you're just effective but not healthy, we have to ask, well, for how long do you think you are going to be so effective? And effective in terms of what? What's the boundary for your effectiveness, etc.? So I guess that's the first thing that we would want to bring to leaders in organizations, team leaders, etc. is this core understanding that it is effective in a healthy way. Both those things. It is the organization needs to be effective, it needs to deliver, it needs to fulfill its mandate, it needs to fulfill its purpose, it needs to execute its mission, you know, all of those ways in which you can put it. And it needs to be a healthy organization. And we can go down into what we mean with a healthy organization. But I think a big part of that healthy organization is this shift that we have in organizations, in thinking about organizations as these machines for making money or producing stuff that can be sold, or packaging and distributing services, or whichever, you know, whichever is the effectiveness metric. but the organization is not only that. The organization is a whole lot of other things. It is also communities of people working together. And it is also about how these people come together and work together. And it is not soft stuff. It is subtle stuff, the health part. So that just as a start, before I go in and start to make some of the links to organization development practice, and what we think perhaps if we are concerned with the education of team leaders, the education of managers who are leading teams. And I think in today's organizations, there's more and more talk about the importance of teams. That's why we focus on teams. Is that the manager is a manager of, maybe to a certain extent, we should get rid of this idea of manager, although I'm not so sure about that either. But that we speak about team leaders across the organization. In a way, the CEO is a team leader. But if the CEO is a team leader, the team is not the organization. That would make it quite meaningless. The CEO is the CEO of the organization, but the team leader of the executive team. And that's a specific team. And so you can go through the organization. There's this proliferation of teams. And in our current types of organizations, these teams mostly have leaders. And that's a very specific kind of a position. And it's not an unproblematic position. It's something that we need to unpack a little bit. What is this team leader? So that's where we focus on teams and team leaders. So the question that I want to ask of you as a start, and we're not going to go out into small groups, Liesel. We're a small enough group to just have the conversation here. I want to ask you, how important are teams in your organization or in the organizations in which you work? The question is a very open kind of a question. It's what about teams? And I tell you why I ask this question, because I think we pay lip service to the idea of teams. We talk about, you know, if we just have a look at the performance management systems of organizations, then I ask myself, where's teams? Where's teamwork? So I don't think organizations take teams that seriously, but they say they do. So that's almost where I want to start the organization. Is the question is, how important are teams in the organizations? And Beatrice, I see your hand is up, and I want to say, go for it.
Thanks very much, Krista, and thanks for your inputs. This is a very interesting question. How important are teams in organizations? And just yesterday, for a couple of hours, I was asked to engage with the senior executive team of a medium-sized business. And the guy facilitating the session had asked if we could have a conversation around, from a leadership perspective, and from a skills and capability perspective, what should the business be thinking about in terms of being future fit? And it was a very interesting conversation. The thing that really struck me, teamwork is one of this business's core values. They tell me they live and die by their core values. The concept of team did not come up once in the conversation that was held around the Future Fit organization. And they really found it very, very difficult to think about, you know, what some of the leadership and team steering type of leadership qualities or skills, capabilities might need to be to continue being competitive, out there, resilient as they have been, etc., etc. They really found it hard to do that thinking. And I really would have loved to be able to spend more time with them to really explore how come, if you really tell me that you are a values-based organization and you practice values-based leadership, the concept of team or the term team never came up once in the ideas they were putting forward. And I think that one of the things that I tried, without being too without suggesting too much, because I really wanted them to do their own thinking. You know, I was trying to steer them in the direction of, what about when your business grows, because it is growing, and things start to become more digital, more fluid, more agile? What does this mean for your team? They found that thinking difficult to do as well. The other thing that I just wanted to say before you pass the baton on to somebody else to engage is that I think the concept of team development is a very foreign concept to a lot of people in businesses that I deal with. They understand team building. Yeah, I do some dynamic stuff to build the team and make it feel good about itself. They understand leading and managing a team and some of the typical activities, but developing a team leaves them very mystified. What does it actually mean to develop a team and to grow capabilities across the team? I'm finding that a lot of people are just struggling with that mindset. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Beatrice. I mean, you confirmed what I'm also picking up. I mean, I've been asking the question is, why don't people invest more in team development? And I'm not saying bringing in early consultants like us. I'm just asking, but if you say teams are the primary site of performance in the organization, then why are you not developing teams? You are developing individuals, sure, in some way, but why are you not developing teams? It's almost like people don't understand the idea actually of a team. So very interesting. Thank you. Nathaniel.
Thank you very much. I think I very much ascribe to what Beatrice had just said, because that is also my experience. Exactly yesterday, I was sitting with a team, and it was going on in my mind, and everybody in the organization has this, amongst its many values, has team as a value. And I asked them, how do you live your values? So they were able to speak quite a bit about all others. But when it came to teams, we work as a team. Explain a little bit more. They were stuck. And these are team leaders. They were stuck in that. So teams is, this as a value is put just because many organizations, it's a fashion. Organizations have this, but no one has thought through as to how to work as a team. And they are organized in groups. They are organized in, we always had organizational structure. And there are people who belong under one manager, and that's what they call a team. But this was developed, when I checked as to when this structure was developed, even this famous idea of teams wasn't there. So it was developed just to have a structure where a manager can therefore manage. And this manager has never had any understanding of management other than the traditional management. So I think this one thing that we have not done enough is to support organization to understand a team and to develop a team. And I like Beatrice's idea to differentiate team building from team development.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. More confirmation. I mean, it is actually quite astonishing that people say teams, and what you're mentioning also, and Beatrice, you as well, is this shift. Is what I hear is people have this more or less bureaucratic organization with actually more rather than less, because let's face it, most organizations are pretty bureaucratically organized. And that goes across sectors. You know, there are actually government functions that are more agile than some of the corporates. So let's not throw shade at government or the public sector here. The private sector is us stuck in bureaucracy. And then you have this requirement that we need to become agile, we need to become customer-centric in the case of private organizations, we need to become citizen-centric in the case of government organizations. And that means that we need to become more responsive as an organization, responsive or agile, whatever word you want to use. And then we have these immense bureaucratic structures that are basically making that kind of customer or citizen centricity impossible. And we know that the way to move performance and decision making closer to the site where value is delivered is by empowering teams and by developing teams. And I think there is just a massive conflict in organizations between the existing kind of bureaucratic structure and this idea of a much more interdependent team that is probably less governed by this massive structure and needs to do its thing. Needs to come into existence, needs to become coherent, needs to become clear about what it is, who it is, and who its customer is, and how it works, and how it relates to its larger world, and all of these things. And I think there's a lot of naivete about that. So I almost think the first thing, if you want to have teams, is get rid of a performance management system. But that's another story. Any other comments about how do you see teams in your world? What's happening around teams in your world? Because this will tell us a lot of what the kind of challenges are that leaders are facing. Team leaders, not organizational leaders, team leaders.
Christy? Hello?
Yeah, I hear you.
So I've got two examples I want to share, and my thinking is going, if you ask how important are teams in organizations, I think the answer is obviously it's important. It's important. You know, I don't think it's not important. I think it's almost so obvious that, of course, because that's how we do our work. We do our work in teams. And that's not going into the OD definition of what's a team and a group. We do our work in groups or in teams, so it's important. But the fact that it doesn't just become a team by telling it it's a team is ignored, I think, because it's, for us, it feels like an obvious thing, but for a lot of other people, it's not. So I'm a workshop mechanic in a big company that makes trucks. And then I become the supervisor in the workshop. And now I have to manage people. And nobody does anything about me having to manage people. I've always just put trucks together and fixed them. And now I've got to manage the people who does that. It's not going to automatically become something I can do. And I'm not automatically going to go start thinking, ooh, okay, I now have a team and I have to develop this team. And I don't know, Google, ask Google or whatever that is. So I think there's a disconnect between, obviously teams are important, but what to do with them to get them to high performance or working great is almost like, I almost want to think, not even thought of necessarily in a lot of the context. So I recently had a conversation with somebody who is the head of organization design in one of our big banks in South Africa. And her biggest issue was every time there's a redesign or a restructure, they work really hard on working out what it should look like and putting new teams together and putting the new structure together. And then it doesn't work. And then people say, no, this restructure didn't work. We have to restructure again. But what she's seeing is that nobody then takes the next step to say, okay, so all these new people are this new team that's supposed to be doing this new thing. And nobody takes that team and think of these humans that now have a new mandate, purpose, whatever, a new way of work, and there are new human beings who don't yet know each other, and do something about that. So I think it's just overlooked so often, and she's so frustrated because people keep saying, or the opinion keeps being that the restructure hasn't worked again. And meantime, it's because we drew the picture of what the new organogram looks like and where's the lines, and these are the new KPIs and job specs and stuff for everybody. But nobody looked at the humans that had to fill those little blockies in the new organogram and deliver on the new mandates and adapt to the new ways of work.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I think. Then the other one, I've now since November delivered our program Leadership 3 times. And we use the same module as the team navigation, the team development module in the new manager bootcamp. Okay, as you know. And through all 3 these programs in this module, we've worked with, some of them were new managers, some of them, the one guy's been in a senior management position for 17 years, in the recent one that we finished last week. And when we get to the team development module, they love it, but it's so new to them. It's like introducing Tuckman, forming, storming, norming, and performing. It's like pennies are dropping. And we think, but you've been a team leader for 17 years. How can this be new news to you? It's new news, And that's why I'm thinking it's this responsibility of us as the OD people to help the team leaders to see that. I agree with you, they don't have to become OD practitioners, but they need some of the competencies that OD practitioners have.
Yeah.
And they love it. And they every single one of these people is sitting in that workshop or on Zoom or whatever, and they want to be better team leaders. And when you give them these skills, or you explain these theories like Tuckman to them, it's like, oh my goodness. And they suddenly start realizing why we always say slow, slow, fast. It doesn't help that you just dive straight into, goals and actions and do the work if you haven't spent some time on the development. But they're not going to know that automatically. And to me, that's how do we get our fingers in there to help these team leaders to be better because they want to be better?
Yeah. They want to be better. And it's amazing. Isn't it amazing how the Tuckman penny drops, or the Lencioni penny drops, or the, whatever it is, team evolution, the idea of team evolution, how that drops. And how the idea of purpose and mandate drops, and how the idea of the team stakeholder world, it just drops. I just want to say hello to Kati, who's joining us from Hungary. Hello, Kati. It's so good to see you here. So I agree with Liesel, is that's almost the work that we then need to do with team leaders, because because these are some of the challenges that they face. I remember years ago working with a telco, and the person there saying to me, you know, the approach to teams here is you look at some high performers and you put them together in a team, and then you abandon them. You leave them and you hope for the best. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. Actually, more often it doesn't quite work as well as you thought it was going to work. And it's probably a little bit of a poisoned chalice for the person who is tasked to lead that team. Any other thoughts about teams in the organizational world? Yes, Richard.
Yeah, just a few random thoughts that slipped through my mind as everyone was talking. I believe in business as in life that many things get caught in the cracks of lack of communication. And I think especially in businesses that happens a lot. And I think it comes out in places like in the assumption that if you are developing individuals, that the team develops along with that. Let's not develop the whole team. Let's develop one person in the team, and then that will fix the team. And well, these are just my perceptions, not coming from any specific experience. And I think there's many things that come into play. I think often teams are only given attention when they are really broken, and not before that. So a team really has to be quite foul for people to actually give it any attention. And then there's other levels that also popped into my mind. And one of them is that the ego of team leaders often gets in the way because they don't want to tell anyone that their team's not effective, because that looks back at themselves. So it's through a lack of maturity that they are unable to say, hey, wait, this is what's going on. I play a part in that. And it's not embarrassing to tell somebody that your team is ineffective. Quite the opposite. Anyway.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think what you emphasize again for me is that the organization focus on the individual as opposed to the organization focus on the primary unit of performance, whatever that can be. And I've heard lots of OD practitioners and people in the field say there's no such thing as individual performance in an organization. There is no such thing as individual performance. So our obsession with measuring individual performance is actually quite disturbing in a way, because it is always it's always to some extent decontextualized, and the primary context for the individual's performance is the team. And of course, the context for the team's performance is the larger ecology in which the team operates. And that's the one thing. And then the other thing that you mentioned is people pay attention to teams when teams are in trouble. And I think that's, I guess that's one of the things that we really want to, as OD practitioners, pay attention to, is that we can get teams off to a better start. We can enable new team leaders to have more skills, more capabilities, more awareness, to get their teams off to a better start, and to get their teams to go through the different development stages of the team. They don't have to get into deep trouble. They probably will get into some trouble at some point. But they can get off to a better start. And I just wonder, if you have to go back to organizational effectiveness, how many millions will it save organizations if teams get off to a better start? Beatrice.
Oh, I love the way this conversation's going, and some really key critical things raised by Richard as well. And Christo, you've built on them. I just want to go back to Liesel's point around the newness and how that creates energy for team leaders and enthusiasm for team leaders as well. And then for me, in organizations, there's a level of team leader that is a sacred cow. And almost self-determined sacred cows. Like, everybody else is like behaving like footballs around me, but I'm okay, Jack. And I think that it's so fundamental, but sometimes one needs to recognize that that's where one is. And as an external OD consultant and intervener and interventionist and all those types of things, the temptation is to rush in and do the team stuff. And actually, as I've got older, I've tried to become a little more patient with that and say to myself, the rest might come, but actually I need to start where I think I'm seeing the issue. And sometimes just inviting the Sacred Cow team leader to be part of a 2 to 3, 3 to 4 coaching process, session coaching process, where I say to them, if at the end of it you still feel there's a need for team intervention, cool, but could we just start with what's working for you, what's feeling problematic for you? And I think that's becoming quite an important part of OD work as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And that links nicely to Richard's other point around the team leaders. And that ego may be arrogance, or it may be fear, or it may be both. And the way our organizations are set up, that they, to a large extent, failure is not an option. And not knowing is not an option. You're supposed to show your mettle now by getting a team together and leading a team. Yeah. Hlengiwe. You've got your hand. Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I just had something. I'm actually busy on something, but I'm just multitasking here. And when I can hear you guys talk and whatever points that you're raising, to me, it comes as leadership ignorance, where they're just being ignorantic of the truth of what is actually going on. And until things are going the way they anticipated not to go, and then obviously they'll blame it on leadership. But if they were then forthcoming with their, with their management or whatever, with their own leadership, they would have picked up at the early stage, So for me, I would like to call it leadership ignorance, where they ignore certain elements. And when we speak of teamwork, team development, anything that's related to team, how can you allow the body to function dysfunctional? How could you allow one leg to go north while the other one is going south, So for me, when we look at the organization, when you look at team leading, when you look at management, whatever that you would like to call it, it should be, it should operate like a body, If I want to drink, I know that my legs need to take me to the tap. If I'm thirsty, I need to know that my mouth needs to open, I need to drink. So that's how it needs to be aligned. So my conclusion, leadership ignorance.
Leadership ignorance. Yeah, I think there's always more of that than we wish to admit. And I think what you bring up then for me here is the point of coherence or congruence, or sometimes in maybe a more linear type of organization, what you would call alignment. How do you get in this team organization, an organization of teams? How do you get them to perform together? I think that's one of the big challenges that leaders in especially agile organizations are facing. Is suddenly we're all across the organization and we are highly interdependent teams and yet discrete teams. And we need to deliver to a customer that is maybe one or two phases down the value stream. And we need to do that in a coherent way. And how do we help leaders to to come to terms with that situation better and deal with that situation better. So I think at this point, there's 2 slides that I want to show you. Liesel, I can share, hey, yes. The one is just the organization development competencies. I want you to have a quick look at the organization development, what we see as the organization development competencies. And you will see that certainly, to a large extent, those competencies, I just want to make that slide big. It comes from our organization development certificate. And of course, our whole organization development certificate is built around these competencies. That's what we develop. Well, if you develop competencies, I think we develop more than competency, but good, let me show you that slide. And then you can see that there is, to a certain extent, there's really no conflict between that. Of course, there are some that are more important than others. Right at the top, you can see communication. Of course, communication is very important as a skill. I think sometimes communication in our development of leaders, it becomes sort of like this thing of you learn a few communication tricks and skills. But there's a much deeper principle here around communication, and that is that you really need to understand who's your stakeholder world, who are in your environment, both externally and internally. And communication as a kind of interaction. Communication is not some instrumental thing that you just do. Communication actually infuses everything you do. Then there's personal development, which for the team leader is of fundamental importance. Beatrice, you mentioned 3 or 4 coaching sessions perhaps with a team leader, and we're already in a very different place, potentially. So I do think coaching for team leaders and other kinds of personal development really needs to, as far as I'm concerned, be at the heart of the development of any leadership, and especially team leader, because you're going to have to deal with the dynamics in the team. You're going to have to face your own approach to conflict, all sorts of things. And to do that effectively, you have to grow and mature, as Richard said. Consulting and project management, I'm going to skip. Change management is, of course, incredibly important, not in the sort of structural, instrumental way that people often think about change management, because there is a certain kind of a job that's change management. But team leaders are leading teams in contexts that are changing at an immense pace. Structures are changing. Everything is changing. So that's incredibly important. Now I can't see what's that bottom one because I've got something that's over it. Business acumen. Of course, that's another critical part of the understanding that a team leader needs to have at whatever level. And with business acumen, we don't necessarily understand finance for non-financial managers. With business acumen, what we mean is that you understand at a fundamental level what is the contribution that you and your team are making to the business of the organization. You understand the cost of your team. You understand things like that, but fundamentally you understand where you fit in and how you contribute. Strategy, again, a critical part of the team. I think for the team leader, in order to understand and make sense of the world of the team, is to understand what the contribution the team is making towards executing the strategy of the organization. And then I think there's also something around here, around the team leader just becoming a little bit more strategic. For me, there's a kind of a distinction between doing strategy and and doing strategy as this thing that we do. We go and we try to see the future and we figure out all sorts of things and we make choices, as opposed to being strategic, becoming a state where you lead your team every single day with strategy in mind, which is a fundamental shift. We can sometimes get stuck in the weeds, as we say. We can get so overly tactically focused or operationally focused that we forget why the team actually exists and what its role in the overall strategic context is. And if there are shifts in that strategic context, then we're still stuck in our old tactics. We can't adapt. So it links quite a bit to change as well. Team development, I don't even want to talk about that because that's at the heart of it. And then facilitation skills. There's a large extent to which the role of the team leader is shifting from the manager boss of the bureaucratic organization towards someone who is facilitating team process and who is facilitating the development of the team. And then, of course, there's a piece around organization design, which I think is important, but I don't want to go into that quite now. Any thoughts from you as you see this, before I show you the other slide, which is more of a map of how to think about the development of this team leader? Any of those competencies that stand out for you as absolutely most critical?
If I can speak, I'm not sure how to show a raised hand, but it's Gail here, no camera.
Yes, Gail.
So this point here, Christo, this slide that you just showed just brings together so magnificently the input that we've received so far from every single speaker. So thank you for sharing this. It just makes so much sense and it brings the flow into perspective. But pulling onto what everybody has said now, I think there's something that we have to deal with, and it confuses the approach, which is, how did that team leader get appointed in the first place? You spoke very, very early on competencies and you mentioned performance development, pushing that aside, but you did mention it. When we have the role of the team leader selected, as often happens, because they're the best person at the task. So you do this really well. Mary's resigned. So Thursday morning when you come into work, this is your new chair. See, it's a lot prettier, a lot more expensive, and the new position of your desk in the office, you can even have a plant. You're going to be fulfilling the role of the team leader. So I think this OD practitioner competence assumes to a large extent that the team leader or the leader of that team is already in a position that understands the competencies that you bring into that, is the first point. And the second one is, when I think it was Beatrice that was talking, and then Liesel spoke about the bank. It's true, our team leaders become a bouncing ball of shifting organizational design, shifting strategy. They're the ones who lead because they know the task well. That's the fundamental thing. If you can do the task well and you understand the organization well, you can work from anywhere. So that storming, norming, and the team consolidation and the coming together is often interrupted or shifted. And Liesel, I get you so deeply when you say, oh, well, it's another design that's failed. It's another shift that's failed. It's another. And we do often look at it from the strategic point of view and not the, what I call the HB point of view, which is the human being point of view. So all of this is making so much sense. And then, so the first one is, how is the team leader being appointed in the first place? And then the second one is, how is the team dynamics considered when that team leader is appointed in the first place? Because we often have, and Beatrice spoke about the coaching and you referenced it as well, Christo. I've been here for 22 years. Mary's been here for 11, and suddenly she's the team leader, and you know she's been on disciplinary this, and so we've got those kind of conversations for me that cloud the real OD practitioner's ability to get stuff working. it makes it harder and more complex. And then you also spoke about the agile organization. You know, I'm really starting to shake my head and wonder about the way the use agile has been used. It's come to the fore enormously during COVID. It's come to the fore particularly largely while we're working in absentia and managing our teams through Skype and Zoom and all that stuff. And I'm really starting to wonder, I don't have a conclusion around this, is what is the role of agility really? When, as you said, Christo, this is bureaucratic from A to Z, because if we don't have bureaucratic and we don't have the red flags pinned from A to Z, we lose control. We lack the ability to follow progress. We lack the ability to measure. So here we are being completely dogmatic more than ever, maybe, in a world of agile verbalization. And that goes to some of the early sessions that we've had around here with VUCA, and then we had Benny or Barney, we debated this. Those are the things that come in and grab our attention, grab our narrative, because this is so exciting. But let's go right back to point A and ask seriously, to sum up, how are the team leaders appointed? What are we doing every single time we reorganize the organizational structure? And how are we utilizing the language around these fantastic philosophies in a bureaucratic environment? And thank you for what's come up today. It's been phenomenal.
Gail, thank you for that. I think you put your finger on something that's of the biggest concern to me. Is we want to be agile in worlds that are largely bureaucratic. And I think at the same time, we cannot afford to let those organizations just languish in being bureaucratic. So this is a very difficult, paradoxical kind of work in my view. To a large extent, the sense that the shift towards agile will actually in the end be a shift from the bottom, well, from everywhere. It won't be a shift from the top, because all that we want the top to do is get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way. It's just get out of the way. It's like the context in which I'm working on a development of agile team leader people now is very bureaucratic, with incredibly strict rules around decision making and incredibly strict rules around who may talk to whom. You don't talk to someone 2 levels up. That's problematic. Now you can imagine in an agile team where you are stuck and you don't know what you are supposed to deliver. And there's a huge gap between the performance targets that were given to your team and what's actually unfolding in the operating world of the team. How demoralizing that is for teams and how that stunts them. And I don't know what you think, but I think the matter of team leaders and team leader selection is to a large extent, in the really bureaucratic organizations, it is about how you play the bureaucratic game. Did you hedge enough? Did you do the sort of bureaucratic politics well enough to get there? In many respects, especially as you get really up in those kinds of organizations. So that's a huge matter. I think what it raises for me as well is this point of the relationship of the team leader and the team. The specific, I don't know, what shall we call it? The ontology of the team leader. Forgive me for using that word. What is the nature of this? How do we describe this? How do we think about what it means to be a team leader? And the relationship of the team leader to the team. And that's why I want to show you the next slide, because this is some of the thinking that builds from Worldview Academy's idea of the establishment and adaptation landscape. So I just want to make that slide big. Share it. And this is quite a theoretical approach. But as a theoretical approach, I think it provides a basis for thinking about the team leader. So I just want to quickly talk you through some of these elements. I mean, if we talk about team development or we talk about organization development, then the first question, of course, that we have to ask ourselves is, what is a team? What is an organization? And of course, a team is a kind of a micro-organization. And as such, it would have some of similar characteristics as a large organization. I mean, most startups are basically just a team. And I say just, not without disrespect. And our idea of how an organization or a team comes into existence is through two interacting kinds of processes. The one process is called the establishment process, and the other process is called the adaptation process. And if I can explain that quickly to you, it comes from a very old idea from Aristotle, which is the agent-arena relationship. It says that if I am an agent, I'm an agent only inside an arena. The arena is that's where I am an agent, and the arena shapes how I am an agent, but as an agent, I can act into this arena. So if we speak about the establishment of the organization, we're talking really about the deep structure of the organization. And if I'm talking about deep structure, I'm not talking here about the org chart, because that's sort of just a shallow structure. A deep structure includes things like the purpose of the team. It includes things like the core capability of the team, the systems and technologies where this team works, the team norms, and the cycle of team practices, like the team meetings, all of those sorts of things. You can see how that scales at organizational level. Those things are quite abstract until human beings act into them. And so if I am a member of a team, and the team has a purpose, that purpose tells me something about how I may show up in the team on the one hand, but on the other hand, and at the same time, that purpose doesn't become real. It doesn't become manifest until we as team members act into that thing. So that's the basic theory. And you can also see this as a theory of constraint and agency. If I am a team leader or a team, then I have certain constraints. And within those constraints, we have agency. With agency, I mean we can act. We can take responsibility. We can make decisions. We can do the work. The actual doing of the work there. And if you ask where humans are on that, they're everywhere there. So what happens in teams and organizations in general is that either the structure as a bureaucracy becomes ever narrower. It narrows. And as it narrows the extent to which I can act, because now I can only act political. And when I act political, I sort of confirms that the structure is only a political structure, and the structure even constrains my ability to be free and to be responsible even more. So that lies at the heart of the thinking here. So if I think of the team, the structure, the constraints that affect how the team operates comes into being. There's the organizational structure or the organizational world in which the team operates. That's a constraint. For instance, if you're in a bureaucratic organization and your team leader reports to the person above you, but it's actually supposed to be agile, so you're supposed to collaborate with that team in that function, that team in that function, you can see there's already a constraint that makes it difficult. That's going. So critical for the team leader is the team leader needs to understand this. The team leader needs to start to get a perspective of what's the organizational structure. Then, of course, there's also the team structure that goes from the team purpose, who's the specific members, based on roles and capabilities, that kind of thing. That becomes a constraint. I mean, something that we often think about in teams is, does the team have the capabilities that it needs? Does it have the capacity that it needs? Does it have the funding that it needs? All of those things are structural constraints for the team leader. The team leader needs to understand this. And then there's a third piece which relates to maturity, which we also call the center of gravity. And that's the, if I can put it briefly, it's almost the extent to which the team is able to deal with its own internal dynamics. And for the individual leader, it's also, we get maturity at both a group level and maturity at individual level. So you would hope that your team leader has the maturity or develops the maturity to show up in such a way inside this this team environment to open up the possibilities of this team. So the center of gravity is there. You can imagine if you have a very defensive team leader, someone who's come there through sticking a few knives or just being promoted according to the Peter principle towards your level of incompetence, then suddenly you're like in a position where now you have to deal with stuff that you don't have the capacity to, the capability, the personal capability to deal with that. You can't deal with this conflict, you become defensive. And that's a kind of a constraint that limits you. And then agency in that case. So that's some of the things that we think that the team leaders need to do. So there are two things here for the team leader. In terms of the constraints, there's the, what is my work as a team leader to enable team agility and to enable it. So you can see the constraints of the establishment is the enabling environment of the team. It is what makes it possible. It's structural. And it can also be the disabling. So if let's say I'm a team leader in a very bureaucratic organization, but we need to work across silos and this one. So how am I going to navigate that situation? How am I going as a team leader build the relationships, shift maybe certain structures, negotiate with people and senior levels to open up certain things, to enable the work of my team so that my team can be more agile. And then your agency work is the work to stimulate team agility. How do you get agility out of people? Agility, Gail, I'm with you about that word. We can call it all sorts of things. Responsiveness, nimbleness, resilience, ability to change, ability to endure, etc., etc., etc. So when I use the word agile, I use it in a very loose kind of thing. And within that, we see three different things that the team leader needs to be able to do. There are things that I do for the team as a team leader. So I stand in the team and I also lift myself out of the team. There are things that I do for the team. So I need to make sure, for instance, that the team gets clarity about why it exists. Sometimes this comes from the organization, it comes from the outside, it's not internally generated. I need to get money for the team. I need to get training for the team. I need to I need to go talk to that team leader to stop obstructing my team. I need to maybe connect this team leader member to that team member, etc. It's things that I need to do for the team. I need to help the team to navigate through this complex world in which it lives. Then at the same time, I need to, of course, start to help the team to do this themselves as a team leader. I need to help the team to come together around a certain purpose and to start to resolve their own dynamics. Sometimes I have to take a lead role in that, and sometimes I need to just create and hold the space in which the team can develop its own dynamics. And then finally, hopefully, I can also just be a member of the team. I don't have to be so much the leader of the team. Because maybe we overemphasize the idea of the leader. Maybe to a certain extent, it's a governance position. It's someone to be held responsible. So this is a kind of an idealistic pathway for, if I look at that, we can say, okay, what is it that we develop in the team leaders? This capacity to enable the team and to stimulate the team. Any thoughts?
So Christo, once again, I just love the way it brings it all together. So thank you again. Thank you for sharing this powerful visual. You said something amazing here, and amongst many things, this enabling versus disabling is sitting with me right now. And I think it's not just the constraint of the team leader, because the intention, I think it's come through today, is very clear. The intention is clear. They really do wake up into the hope and intention of creating good and achieving goals and working into the strategy and all of that. But I'm just thinking how beautifully, and I'd love to hear from the rest of the participants, this enabling versus disabling, because I think that that's sometimes an underpinning in its structure, in its design, that's not brought to the fore as clearly as you just did. And I think that could perhaps be a starting point when looking at the design, the structure, and the new creations of whatever that might be, which is the enabling and disabling factors. And yes, it's a hard one, because how much of this is going to be visible and how much of this is the invisible that's going to emerge? So that's just my thinking right now, but really I need to internalize this, because so much came up, and thanks for that sharing.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah. Beatrice.
Can I come in just with a sort of response to you, Gail? But I think often in the work that I've done, and it depends at what level you're working with team leaders, but I often find that one of the greatest dilemmas doing that work is when they want to enable, but they feel disabled themselves. And so much of the process is about how do they then break through that barrier which they feel as disabling. And one of the most challenging conversations I've ever had with a whole group of team leaders from a warehouse environment was, it suits you to feel disabled by the one-up level, because then you can just carry on doing what you're doing. And when we had that conversation, it was about, yes, but you know, what do we do, and the career limiting stuff and all the rest of it. And yeah, that is always an interesting one for me, is often those who want to enable feel disabled, and how do we help them break that cycle?
That's goosebump insight, Beatrice. Thank you. That is really, thank you.
Yeah, I always think of that Karl Marx quote that says we make history in conditions not of our own making. And I think that's such a big piece of the work, Beatrice, is the work to start to separate out what is actually a real constraint and what is a constraint that I am keeping in place to avoid responsibility and to avoid agency. For me, there's when we do leadership development, team leader development, team development, there's a core principle, and that this is about the opening up and the expansion of agency, whatever that may mean. Is that at every moment, there's, to some extent, there's something that you're not taking responsibility for that maybe you can take responsibility for. And it's going. So often when we work with leaders in very disabling kinds of environments where their own bosses, it's just like this corporate confusion, and they just sit there and they're trying to cope. There's this thing of Meg Wheatley of An Island of Sanity. But okay, so it's hard, but you don't have to give it down. You can maybe in this small environment where you are, you can create something that's more whole and healthy. And you can do that. You can do that, for instance, by not having the same management habits as your own boss. You can start to treat people differently. Just that, just small little things that will start to make a shift here, that will make your life here a little bit better. And maybe because then you start to expand your agency and you start to create a more enabling structure. And that can become a process where you can then expand into domains where you did not think that you have any agency. You can discover new agency. You can discover more agency. It's an interesting thing, because I also think our organizations, especially bureaucratic organizations, are set up in such a way that people see themselves as victims. And to a certain extent, you have to admit they are victimized to a certain extent. But how can we get out of this victim narrative? And do the little bit that we can do. Any other thoughts around the development of team leader? I think, in terms of process, I think there are very specific things that we can help team leaders here with. The first piece is around how do you think about a team? What makes a team a coherent team? What gives a team an identity? And what is the kind of work that you can do with your team to create an identity? Can you ask your team, can you make sure that everyone on your team actually start to get to know each other? And can you see that this team has its own specific identity that is maybe rooted in its purpose, but is expressed in the team vision, etc., etc. That's an important piece of work. I think in your organizations that become more agile and that are shifting out of the strictures of bureaucracy, a massively important piece of work for the team leader is to help the team to see itself in its own context, to see itself in the team world, and to start to identify what are the tensions in that world, what are the constraints, and how are we going to work with those constraints? Because we can't just throw up our hands and say, well, that person always blocks me, so I'm just going to give up. The reality of organizations, I think, is that people work around stuff. So I think some of our work as organization development practitioners is revolutionary and countercultural, is we're enabling people at certain points of the organization to actually work around the structure of the organization, and in that way to start to change the structure. We won't always admit that to the senior leaders in the organization, but I think that's the reality. And then a key piece of the work and I think that's, Liesel, when you started, is we have to shift from it's just output performance above everything towards it's actually people who are delivering this. And if we don't look at the internal health of the team, then the team will run into troubles. In the agile context, there's also a part around it's a shift from content to process. And then it's useful for team leaders to actually unconsciously work with the development of the team as it goes through Acumen stages. But then also in terms of maturity, what are the growth edges of the team? Where can it expand its agency? And to deliberately start to work with it. So those are just some ideas around what teams can do. Chamo, Pearl, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, you can rather use Pearl because Tiamo is generally murdered. I do apologize for being quiet most of the time, so I am listening quite attentively. So I just wanted to everything has been quite insightful and I am quite grateful for that. Thank you so much. I just wanted to find out, so I'm a new team leader we work in wellness. I don't know if you guys know ICAS quite well. And in working in wellness, I'm a team leader that basically got a promotional role where I went in from working in one of the teams that I'm now managing to obviously leading that team. And the process that ICAS followed, I believe, is flawless. And I could be biased, obviously, because I'm pro ICAS. But so the process they followed was obviously an interview process, and they had quite stringent schedules and very practical questions that they would ask, and want to make sure that you can deal with different situations and at different days, and obviously then became successful in the position. But now my question is that before I became a team leader, the teams that I am managing, it's 4 different teams that do 4 totally different things. We were 2 different departments. Basically, we were one department as operations, but then 2 different mini departments which created some form of a silos. So everybody functioned independently. Everybody knew what the other one was doing that's working within their department, but then now all of those teams that used to be 2 teams have become, sorry, my phone is ringing. So have become now 4 teams under one department, and they are expected to case manage. I'm not aware how well versed you guys are with case management. So how do we break the silos? Basically, sorry for the long story. How do we break the silos of the 2 teams that used to, or the 2 subdivisions that used to exist and now are part of one division, and are then now managed by somebody who used to be part of the one division, but now has to also be incorporated in the other subdivision? I hope my question makes sense.
Well, so if I just to repeat, you've become the team leader of this new team that's basically formed out of two teams getting together.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's still a divide between them.
Yes.
They still operate as if they are 2 distinct teams. They haven't formed a new identity.
Yes, basically.
So I'd love to put this question to my OD colleagues on the call and say, what are the next questions you want to ask Paul? Beatrice, Liesel?
So she also mentioned, Paul, you also mentioned it's actually 4 different teams from 2 different areas that have to work together. So
yes.
So if there are 4 teams who now have to work together, do these 4 teams have one mandate?
Yes, or just case management.
And how clear is that to the team? So a few times today we've spoken about Acumen, storming, forming, norming, whatever. Now this is a new team. Whenever anything changes in a team, you're back to forming. Okay, so you've got to pay attention to the forming stage and then the storming, so that you set up the boundaries so that you can go into norming and performing. But the second part is, have you allowed this team the time and space and a process to unpack the mandate? Because the mandate would have changed for a lot of people in the team, right? And then for the
So sorry, Liesel. So the teams are still doing the functions that they were doing, just in a bigger department under one umbrella. So nothing has changed in terms of their work and roles and responsibilities. It's just that they fall now under a bigger department that used to be them and us, and now it has to be us.
Okay. I have to come in here. I
Yes.
just have to come in here. Sorry, Pearl, I have to challenge what you just said. Nothing's changed. Everything has changed. And that's your starting point, is to actually work with the team to identify what feels new, what feels different, what feels the same, what are we struggling with, what are we okay with, and clarity of mandate and all of that. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Beatrice. I like being challenged, so you're doing great.
How big is the team, Pearl?
It used to be 23. I'm sitting at 18 at the moment. 18
people, yeah. And they all directly report to you.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's your team. Yeah. It's, you know, it's whenever, as Liesel says, whenever something in the team changes, mentorship changes, leadership of the team changes, boundaries between subparts of the team changes. It is always a good idea to go back and to ask ourselves, well, why do we exist? For whom do we exist? Who do we need to keep happy in the organization? Who do we think we are? How are we connected here? Do we know each other around the table? Do we beyond just the role description? And those are, it's always good to just go back and start there and to open up that conversation. And to ask people, why are you one team? Why would you be two teams? What would make you two teams? It's actually, you know, those kinds. But go back to purpose. Go back to purpose, go back to mandate, and start the conversation there. And then from there on, you can go back into, okay, are there certain team dynamics issues? You know, we still red and they still blue, and I'm always going to be red, and that person is always going to be blue, and so on. And maybe that's something that does not change overnight, and maybe it's not even that important that it changes overnight. But it is important that we identify where we actually need each other, where we are interdependent and need to work together and get that right.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense to me. Thank you. I think I didn't do that. So I'll go back to the drawing board and kind of formulate questions that will give me a clearer understanding of how the change impacted them.
Yeah. I guess change also just creates a lot of uncertainty for people, so they hedge against it. They think that whatever change is going to be uncomfortable. We'd rather just stay the way things are. So if you can get those sorts of uncertainties out of the way, it might help.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Pleasure. Well, that brings us to past, Liesel.
It does. And all you've done, Christy, is made the work of us OD people even harder.
Is it? How? Yeah, I think it's hard work. But
no,
we can pass lots of it on to the team leaders. They can do a lot of it themselves.
Exactly. But what jumped out for me today was everything we spoke about makes sense for everybody on this call. Well, unless there's people who hasn't opposed our views and stuff. But it's just hard to get in. We we know what we've got to do.
Mm.
We're quite certain that is what is needed and that is what will help. But to get organizations to allow us to come and do that work, to get team leaders to go, I need help. I think that's what's hard.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry to just start talking. I've been looking for an icon to raise my hand. I'm not familiar with Zoom.
You're welcome to just shout if you can't find hand icons, Pam.
If you allow me, though, I'll just chip in my perspective on this call. First of all, thank you so much for hosting us. This is my first time attending this call, and I'm fairly new at Worldview Technologies, so I'm still living in a very nice bubble. And so far, I mean, what I can say is most of the stuff that everyone has touched on, we're very fortunate that, you know, we are actively working on and implementing interventions to better our teams. And I think that's just mainly driven by our values, and I'll just phrase it as culture as well, because mainly the focus is to respect each other, help each other, and there's a lot of work that we do that involves cross functions. So we don't necessarily have departments that work in silos. Ultimately, everyone, I mean, at some point has to consult somebody from another function, and some functions, for them to deliver their KPAs, it's sort of like they have to hand over some of the work that they've been doing to the next function, so that it materializes as a, you know, either a sale or a potential, you know, a big win at some point. So just to touch on, I think it's Pearl who has a team dynamic. I'm in HR, but more specifically focusing on recruitment. We've got a dedicated person who does development. It's a pity she couldn't join. She also was planning on joining a call. I'm sure Christo, you guys probably know her. Her name is Anne. And we are, you know, constantly challenged to just work on, I always say, as long as you're in HR, whether you like it or not, you're an OD practitioner. And we're very fortunate to be led by, you know, an OD practitioner as well, who lives and breathes OD. So we are constantly challenged and asked if we've done enough, you know, to develop staff, to develop teams, other, well, people on the personal, individual level, and then the team as well. I'm constantly challenged to make sure that I recruit the right people into the spaces that we try to fill. So one of the things that we do, Pearl, just small activities that we do to ensure that we know the well-being of people as individuals and ultimately, you know, as teams, is that when you are new in a position, whether you've been promoted or you're just a fairly new external candidate, we have check-in meetings with you for a period of 3 months. For the first month, it's every week. And then as time goes, it will be 2 weeks and then 1 month. But we will be on your case just to make sure that you are coping, you're fine, You don't need anything extra. You know, are you going in the right direction? Whatever the case may be. I think maybe that could also help you, especially with such a big team. If it's not you, you can ask that maybe your HR to help you, because even if you were to ask, some people are not so comfortable, you know, talking directly to their managers about, you know, how they finding, whatever the case may be. You can ask HR to drive that process for you. So the slides that you presented, Christo, thank you for that. For me, it was I was listening to a second version, because when I joined, I was fortunate that Craig took us through he called it an OD masterclass. So he took us through those slides, and you know, just gave us some education around how to handle our teams. So I really am grateful for this session. It has given some good insights and some good, you know, things to take home or take back to the team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam. Good. Well, I think that's it.
Thank you, guys. It was a great session today. Always appreciate it.
Nice to have you here, Gail.
Thank you.
Thought-provoking questions and input.
You guys just raised the platform. It's awesome to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gail.
Okay. Thank you, Christo. Thank you, Liesl. I'm so sorry because I didn't get first your link and I was late. So, but I tried to come up to speed with you, and it was great to hear your thoughts on agility and bureaucracy and how we cope with it in this world when I see clients again wanting to be a little more bureaucratic because of working from home and all that stuff. So there are huge contradictions, I think, and that's very interesting to address. So my thoughts are working, and thanks for that.
It's so nice to see you, Kati.
Yes, I was so glad to have your invitation, and I said that that's good to catch up. So.